with our alumni, used to study on this course as well. A couple of years ago, I started a company which has turned out to be pretty successful in cryptocurrency business. And today's topic is financial innovations, and cryptocurrencies is, you could say, never seen in terms of the magnitude, the significance, the rapid development of the market. I can't recall anything this happening in, say, in a bit more than 10 years' time. So he knows this market, he operates in this market, and he will join us on Thursday. He kindly sent me the material just today. I downloaded that to my courses, also added there 2 articles from last year on cryptos and decentralized finance from Economist, and Eugene also asked, he also sent me kind of a link, 2 links to short articles, and he asked me to ask you to take a look at those before Thursday's lecture. So that's kind of a that would be the way to get most out of his visit on Thursday. So please take a look at that material. I also sent that kind of this message on as a what is this? My courses message. So if you haven't received that yet, so you will receive it in just very near future. So on that message are the 2 links. The material is on his Thursday's, attached to his Thursday's lecture. So very much looking forward to that. He also looks forward to kind of us being active on his visit. I remember him; he was very active himself, and he's a bit concerned about this online version as kind of a as we all would prefer being kind of in person in classroom, but obviously this seems to be kind of this year it's impossible, but let's make it kind of the most out of that on Thursday. Okay, any questions, comments you might have on anything? Just a reminder, you probably remember kind of that this week's Friday is the deadline for the term paper. I hope that you have been doing good progress on that. On last week's Thursday, we discussed about shadow banking system, which is a very broad term, as I suggested, but and can be defined more narrowly or just kind of to involve, say, credit market. But the broad term, as we were discussing about, includes essentially anything beyond traditional kind of on-banking balance sheet financial business. And we discussed about different funds, markets, which we can see that the markets have grown kind of rapidly in the US, in Europe. There is some innovation, obviously, kind of when new different funds have been developed for customers. Investment banking was the last topic on Thursday that we didn't have time to go through, but we'll go through that kind of today. Let me see how do I get over there. So before going to financial innovation, let's take a look at what investment banks do. They help companies when they delist. This was the last topic that we were discussing on Thursday. But luckily, there we are so far have been more rare than IPOs. So investment banks, they offer advice, they offer marketing, distribution services, aftermarket support in IPOs. Deliveroo's case, that was about IPO, on which they also utilized investment banks as advisors. They help in mergers and acquisitions, in spin-offs. They act as middlemen in purchases and sales of companies. And they also offer asset management services, discretionary asset management services, and also funds, kind of nowadays, different funds for their, say, very wealthy or at least somewhat wealthy clients. So they have broadened their offering from being an advisor in companies, IPOs and M&As only. Why do they exist? The more you think about that, it's of course, they have the knowledge. They have the knowledge and connections with the customers. A company planning an IPO doesn't know the investors, but investment banks, they do have their investor connections. They know the institutional investors. They have a link to retail client base one way or another. So they act as intermediaries between the companies and investors. Firms use a reputable investment bank. So in a way, you could say that when a company hires an investment bank and pays, which is the average fee in IPOs, for example, in the US, it's around 7%. So company raising 100 million euros or $100 million as new equity. So they pay as a fee 7 million to the investment bank. You might think, okay, that's a lot. So how does it make any sense? That is the market rate. So that is what Goldman Sachs charges you. You could hire some less expensive, obviously, and definitely they would be in the market, somebody doing that at 2% of a fee. But as the key criteria in selecting the investment bank is the reputation, so that is the most valuable asset that investment banks have is the reputation, which in a way you could say that customers, in a way, they rent that reputation when hiring the investment bank in, say, in IPO or in M&A. Question about IPOs, which Deliveroo was a case company. It's very seldomly, typically once in a lifetime. It's a strategic event, really, you would say, very important. One of the most important events that the company has in its operations is when it decides to execute an IPO. So companies do it very rarely, while investment banks do that as their business. The question is that how should we price our IPO as we recruit an investment bank? You might think that this investment bank will get its share, say 7%, if IPOs goes through successfully. So the company is able to collect this, say, 100 million. If it fails, so the investment bank gets essentially, it's not nothing, but close to nothing. So they don't get their 7%. So to make sure that IPO will go through and investors find that as an attractive offering, so you might think that investment banks have an incentive to underprice that issue. While companies, obviously, and the old investors, they might have an incentive to overprice the IPO. How do we solve this issue is that we hire a investment bank which is concerned about its reputation. An investment bank does not have an incentive, obviously, not to overprice because there's a risk that IPO will fail, but not underprice the IPO too much either. As what is the cost of an underpricing, of a, say, significant underpricing? So that would mean that the shareholders of the company, they would recognize that they were selling the new shares too cheaply. An investment for investment bank, that would be a hit for the reputation, as they organizing these IPOs, arranging that, those is their business. So they look new customers all the time. And if the customers learn that one specific investment bank consistently underprices IPOs, so new customers will not choose this investment bank as their kind of investment banker. So that is the cost. So they should have a incentive which is aligned to so the investment bank and the company to price it in a way that there will be no regrets, not from the investment bank side and especially from the company's side. Typically, our IPOs, the pricing is targeted somewhere minus, say, IPO discount is somewhere around 15%. What happened in Deliveroo, which you are specialist now, as that was the case company. So Deliveroo had hired, it was a massive IPO, biggest for many years in the London Stock Exchange in terms of the size. So they hired the reputable Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, but they also had kind of 4 joint book runners. So very reputable group of investment banks that they hired to make sure that everything goes as well as possible. The end result was not, you would say, not optimal in the sense, but you might think that, okay, there was a lot of criticism, and especially afterwards, not the least as we learned that the stock price kind of fell from the IPO price from this 390. A lot of disappointment among investors who participated in this IPO. And as you kind of found out, that there were several kind of causes for criticism. But no matter what, this is something that we know afterwards. All this information was available before the IPO. And despite all this fuss and all the criticism, the IPO was successful in the sense that the company was able to collect this close to 1 billion new capital. So in a way, it didn't fail. It was not a massive failure. The massive failure had been that they had not been able to collect new equity. Now they have this equity, and they can raise their business, they can make these investments. Okay, it didn't go as smoothly as everybody had kind of hoped. So the aftermarket performance has been a disappointment. Obviously a hit for the reputation for Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, especially for Goldman Sachs. You would think that Goldman Sachs cannot be happy. Okay, they got the fee, they got the money, but it was a hit on their reputation in terms of an IPO organizer. Remains to be seen how Deliveroo will be able to increase its business. As we saw already, kind of as you very well kind of reported, so the basic business they have been able to grow their business, and whether or not the market cap will kind of pick up at some point again, and the profitability kind of they turn as a profitable company and on a growth path. So remains to be seen, but at least they were able to raise new equity. But very kind of a valuable lesson in the sense that kind of we learned that it's not a guarantee. Kind of you can hire the most respected investment banks to help you, but things can go kind of not optimally. Kind of you can. There's no guarantee that kind of that everything goes kind of very smoothly and everybody's happy. Of course, that is what everybody would hope. That every now and then, kind of the aftermarket development is, I could say, a disappointment. At least they tried. They hired the most respected investment banks. What are these leading investment banks? In terms of revenue last year, of all investment bank activities, JP Morgan charged 12 billion, Goldman Sachs almost as much, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, Citi, and so on. So this is kind of this is what the investment banks are kind of building their reputation. They're showing that we are big, we must be good as customers are choosing us. With regard to different products, equity market, capital markets, there are IPOs, which is pretty big market, which is what Deliveroo was about. Goldman Sachs is number one. M&As, the biggest market in terms of the revenue, Goldman Sachs was number one as well. In the debt market, JP Morgan seems to be leading, was leading. So corporate bond investment, high yield corporate bond issuance is JP Morgan number one. Syndicated lending, investment grade and leverage, JP Morgan has been number one as an investment bank. In IPOs, number one, Goldman Sachs. As you can see, in terms of the total volume, 2021 was a clear increase in terms of the revenues for investment banks. Lots more activity in IPOs as in investment banking overall. 129 billion versus 91 in 2020. So it has been a good year, kind of despite the COVID and everything for investment banks. A lot of activities, a lot of IPOs, a lot of new kind of bond issuances, a lot of M&As in the market. So busy times for investment banks. As just kind of examples, a few examples I took from Valmet and Neles, a Finnish merger of two companies. If you look at the release when this was published, there at the end, they communicate who were the advisors. Valmet was advised by Bank of America Securities and Nordea, and then the Snellman, Skadden, blah, 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 as legal advisors, while Neles used Morgan Stanley as an international lead advisor and Access Partners as financial advisors locally, and then legal advisors, Rosier and Freshfields, blah, blah, blah. So both kind of parties typically use in M&As, they use their own advisors to make sure that everything goes kind of by the book. In terms of the bond market, Neste Corporation raised 500 million in terms of green bond. This was last spring, where Barclays, Citigroup Global Markets, and Nordea acted as joint lead managers. So even though it's only, you would say, only 500 million, half a billion, so kind of it looks that Neste found that they need to utilize, they need to employ kind of three big banks as their investment banks to help them. And in terms of syndicated loans, which is a syndication of many lenders. It's a loan syndicate. Instead of borrowing from one, you borrow from a syndicate of different banks. Just as an example, from a couple of years ago, JP Morgan, HSBC, and Mizuno were underwriting 8 billion syndicated loan for Mexico's state-owned company Pemex. So instead of borrowing from one, they borrow from a syndicate from 3 different banks. The question there is that this case you could have. Can you all see this kind of Perttu's question? Very good question. It went through. The question is that why would this harm Goldman Sachs' reputation in the view of companies wanting to go public? Their reputation in the eyes of investors. Yeah, and that is the key. Kind of the question is that as all this is public information, Deliveroo. So the next time the kind of Goldman Sachs approaches, they have the next IPO. Okay, doesn't have directly to do with Deliveroo yet. Remember, once a company kind of raises new equity via an IPO and becomes publicly traded, as Deliveroo did, that is typically the end of the capital kind of transactions of a company. Companies typically need new equity at some point. And if it has, as Deliveroo so far has been, a disappointment, kind of raising new equity is much more challenging than in the other case where the stock price has been kind of going upwards, continued going upwards. So it would be much more easier for the company to sell their shares for new equity holders. The same in M&As. So no, of course, nobody is happy seeing that Deliveroo stock price has been performing so badly. But related to your question, kind of a next round, another company B, will plan an IPO and hire Goldman Sachs as an advisor. If all the investors are aware that Goldman Sachs was accepted this Deliveroo kind of as a customer in IPO and accepted the pricing, and at the hindsight we can see that you could say it was at least, I don't know whether it was overpriced because investors were willing to kind of invest kind of as much as the company was seeking the capital, but the valuation was, at least you could say, stretched kind of it was pushed to the limit, to the upper limit. So the next round, kind of Goldman Sachs, say I would be the investor or representative of a pension fund. Goldman Sachs calls me and says that, Vesa, how about kind of joining? We have a very promising kind of IPO in pipeline. I said, okay, I bought your story last time. It was Deliveroo, but I'm not happy. So kind of in that sense, Goldman Sachs in the future business faces some obstacles. And the same is kind of companies kind of also recognize that Goldman Sachs, I don't know, kind of, it was not a total failure, but it didn't go kind of as well as kind of hoped. So when choosing the investment bank, they might see that Goldman Sachs is kind of took a hit kind of in terms of reputation. So they might favor some other investment bank, which has a clean history from the very recent kind of past. So in that sense, you can't measure this, but anyway, it was not good for the Goldman Sachs' reputation that this IPO was at the end of the day. So aftermarket performance has been so bad. So, but it was not a total failure. So that's kind of, it's good to remember. When Facebook had an IPO several years ago, the stock price kind of performed very badly, and then many investors were kind of arguing that this was kind of overpriced and can never kind of be successful, but it has kind of gone extremely well kind of ever since, until the very recently when it collapsed last week. But anyway, that's another story. But kind of there is a probability that it will kind of recover, and investors kind of the long-term investors will be happy. But so far, what is this now? 10 months has passed, so the first 10 months has been kind of a disappointment. Any other questions on investment banking? Shall we go to today's topic, which is financial innovation? This over here. Financial innovations. Before going to topic, the topic kind of related, kind of a preface. Financial innovations in the very kind of say somewhat recently have been criticized also. And Paul Volcker, you remember who Paul Volcker was? And actually, he was the chairman of Fed. He was interviewed in Inside Job movie also, as he was the chairman of Fed in 1970s. So he somewhat famously in 2009 he said that the banking industry had taken finance to the brink of disaster, and the automatic teller machine has been the only useful innovation in banking in the past 20 years. So somewhat critical and pretty kind of high caliber guy, high profile person, the former chairman of the American Central Bank. In the Inside Job movie, you might remember kind of representative of a Chinese investment, kind of sovereign wealth fund, as he was saying that the real engineers build bridges, while the financial engineers build dreams. So pretty critical kind of take on financial innovation as well. You might remember this kind of criticism in Inside Job movie. And that is kind of it's a bit kind of you could say disappointing that many high profile finance people say, okay, financial innovations kind of do not add any value. As you could say that any innovation is kind of, the aim is for good. It's kind of, that is it's the most powerful forces that shape kind of societies. And why would financial sector be different than, say, building bridges, for example? So they are very concrete. What financial innovations are kind of the challenge there is that they're somewhat abstract. That's kind of as just one, you could say, acid test. Just think for a short moment, a world where banks wouldn't exist, or say mutual funds would not exist. So in terms of in terms of kind of efficiency, that the capital flows as efficiently as possible from the surplus sector to the deficit sector. So it's a key that we have a well-functioning financial markets where we have many different kind of operators, banks, we have funds, and just as an example, as we have the European capital markets kind of initiative. So in Europe, we have recognized that our financial markets is one reason why the whole European market is not as competitive as American one. So it is a disadvantage that we have been so bank-centric in the past. So we need innovations, we need market-based financing more. Venture capital, private equity, all this is formally has been acknowledged. So which means that financial innovations kind of they play a very important role in today's world, and we are seeing new innovations kind of all the time coming, as we will see in a minute. Why this you might understand in Volcker's kind of speech in 2009 and the whole Inside Job movie, which was criticizing. Obviously, there were some merits kind of in. Obviously, the movie is kind of I find it excellent. Of course, it was a bit colorful, kind of as a document, and you could say that kind of it was very critical of the financial market. There are some reasons to be critical, kind of, but the main reason was that as there was an article in the Innovation Policy and the Economy in 2012 by Johnson and Vaughan, referring to the Alan Greenspan's, who was kind of successor of Paul Volcker. So he referred to kind of the innovations that Greenspan was kind of celebrating. He was one of the architects of deregulation. He thought of any innovation just would, but then we learned afterwards that collateralized debt obligations, synthetic credit default options, credit default swaps either amplified or even caused the crisis. So it went too far. The innovation went too far. And let's next take a quick look at kind of what went wrong. So today we'll talk about responses to changes in demand and supply. So this is kind of two main kind of drivers for innovation. There's a demand for innovation, and sometimes there's a supply. We'll talk about evolution of something called fintech, financial technology, financial engineering. As a case, we'll talk about peer-to-peer lending, and as the last topic, the sustainability of these new shadow banks, such as peer-to-peer lending companies in this current environment. As this is something that as we were discussing about the financial regulation. So what we learned that for certain reasons, the banking regulation has become tougher and tougher in terms of capital adequacy, liquidity, kind of reporting everything, which banks have been kind of complaining. And you could say, you could argue kind of with good reason that kind of the tougher regulation has opened the door for new shadow banks, which do not need to kind of satisfy, say, the capital requirements that have been set for the banks, or liquidity requirements, or reporting requirements. So, which the regulator kind of by making the life of banks tougher and tougher, opens the market, opens the door for newcomers, which are kind of regulatory light. And the question is, okay, peer-to-peer lending market has been one kind of in the core of a banking business, as it has to do with lending. So that's why I took this peer-to-peer lending as a case. Any questions, comments you might have here? Okay. Respond to changes in demand and supply. So innovation kind of course, it aims to be kind of provide something valuable, and sometimes the financial environment changes so that it stimulates demand for new structures, new products, new something, new offerings. Sometimes innovations can emerge as changes in the supplies. The third one, which kind of I just very shortly kind of mention here, is that avoidance of existing regulation, including taxation. Taxation laws are, you could say, very important driver for, say, financial innovation. To put it in different ways, kind of to avoid taxation, kind of different financial products have been developed. Is it ethically good? Is it ethically bad? I don't have a view on that. But taxation is in many cases, it has been a driver in innovating new financial products. But demand. So typically new products create value if they fulfill an unsatisfied demand, such as I mentioned, suggested that the change in financial environment in the 70s when the interest rates in the US jumped, so the adjustable rate mortgage loans kind of were launched, and financial derivatives became kind of very widely used to hedge against, say, interest rate risk. We have already kind of on last lecture, we have been kind of covering several products which have been tailored to satisfy customer needs. Mutual funds, you get automatic diversification, kind of professional fund management and reporting, everything kind of economies of scale. So obviously there has been a demand from customer base. Otherwise, this product has not been able to grow. The whole market has not been able to grow this size as it is today in the US and in Europe, obviously. Mutual funds, ETFs, more recent, kind of like mutual funds, but they are more kind of cost efficient, cheaper. You can trade them with kind of during the day, so slightly different to satisfy some different needs than mutual funds kind of aim to satisfy. Target date funds, hedge funds, venture funds, private equity funds, these are financial innovations. And you just think what kind of, if you believe the market, so how big this market has grown, and it seems to be growing all the time. So these innovations do have a place in the development of, say, financial community, financial kind of market. So there is a demand. The critique that has to do with what happened before the global financial crisis 2008 was that in early 2000s, it was an era of very low inflation, very low interest rates. Investors were kind of looking for some higher yields. So there was a hunt for yield. From bonds, you didn't get any yield. Say plain vanilla kind of corporate bonds, the yields were very low. So new products were launched. So in a way, there was a demand, but where it went a bit kind of, you might say, in hindsight too far, was that the development of securitization, there is nothing bad in securitization as such. So obviously you can securitize, say, different asset-backed securities, bonds and other notes that are backed by a package of different assets. It could be collateralized debt obligations. So it is a package which is kind of backed by corporate bonds or some other loans. So there is nothing wrong with this as such, but it went a bit too far. So you would say that it's pretty common understanding that because of the disguise of risk and agency problems, so this was among the causes of the whole financial crisis. Why that happened? That was kind of the topic of pretty well kind of explained this inside the movie. I encourage you to take another look at kind of watch it again. But this one picture shows it pretty nicely, kind of as it used to be, that the customer, when taking kind of a home loan, mortgage loan, it took it from the bank, and bank had it on its balance sheet. That was kind of that was the banking in the good old days. But then it changed. As bank sold these receivables to some other kind of institution, some special purpose vehicle, which the only idea was to slice these these tranches, these receivables in different tranches, such as senior, mezzanine, subordinate, equity. So these are called tranches. And these then were sold for investors. So investors were able to choose whether they invest in senior, tranche, mezzanine fund, subordinate, or whatever. So nothing wrong in this per se. But where it went wrong was that investors who didn't know what is the true credit quality of one specific tranche, so needed to rely on credit rating agencies. And as credit rating agencies, that's something that we have learned now after the crisis, they gave inflated, so that is too high ratings for some of these, so many of these, not only companies, not only for Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and so on, but also these tranches that were targeted to investors. So investors took risks that they were not aware of. So they relied fully on credit rating agencies credit rating, and when the credit rating then eventually 2007-8 went down, so the risks realized. So that was about the opaqueness of these structures. So investors at the end of the day invested in something that they did not understand. So they were pretty complex structures, they were pretty opaque, so unclear from investors' point of view, and as this CFA shadow banking article suggests, so credit risk was close to impossible to assess. As an example, this is not per se a criticism against one specific innovation, but it just happened so quickly and without investors recognizing what's going on. That's one thing, before it was too late. The other thing was this systemic risk, as there was an article in Reuters referring to the AIG, which was then also several times mentioned in the Inside Job movie, insurance company. There is nothing wrong in the product of a credit default swap as such. You can easily hedge if you have a credit risk in your portfolio, you can hedge against this risk by buying credit default swaps. So that is like an insurance product. Everything good, nothing wrong with the product per se. But what happened was that AIG became the massive player, selling and only selling, while Goldman Sachs was buying them and selling those kind of products. AIG as an insurance company only was selling those and was not aware of the massive risks that lie behind these products. So credit default swaps sold by AIG covered more than 440 billion in bonds. So it became too massive concentration of risk for one company only. So AIG was not aware of the magnitude of the risks, and had AIG bankrupt, that had led to this domino effect, other companies who had the opposite position with AIG, and AIG not paying, so had possibly led to collapse of other financial institutions as well, such as Goldman Sachs. And that was a criticism that was highlighted in the movie. That as the US a government saved, so bailed out AIG, and they paid, so that made it possible that AIG was able to meet their commitments with, say, Goldman Sachs, which was one of the counterparties, dollar to dollar. So there was no risk that no hit, no loss that Goldman Sachs or any other counterparties of AIG needed to kind of to face. So that was kind of you could say that too good to be true, but it happened. It happened. So AIG was not let go bankrupt. It was kind of bailed out, and all the commitments kind of were fully committed to prevent this systemic risk, which the regulator did not put kind of emphasis, did not recognize earlier, and that is something. That's why the big banks nowadays are kind of there's a special list, as we saw, the globally systemic kind of systemically important financial institutions. So that is a pretty reason that list has been developed after the financial crisis. Nothing like this was even the regulator was not aware before the financial crisis. So not innovation per se, you could say that there's nothing wrong, but they were kind of misused. The market, as one picture, kind of how it grew until 2006, especially asset-backed securities, collateral debt obligations, and different other kind of residential mortgage-backed securities, commercial-backed securities, how it collapsed after financial crisis. So that was a massive increase in the markets, but then the collapse was also kind of that was very rapid, and the market has hardly recovered from that. Okay, let's move on to fintech, financial technology, which is a somewhat recent of a phenomenon, and that can be traced back to, okay, technology has been kind of utilized, obviously, kind of for in the history of banking, but more or less kind of in 2014, it was kind of formally recognized that, okay, this is a thing that needs attention, and there has been innovation in the market for centuries. So just kind of to mention that, okay, the banking kind of originated in Mesopotamia, coins kind of very early on in Amsterdam Stock Exchange kind of was founded in 1602. Central bank, the first ever global central bank globally was in Sweden, 1668. Mutual funds in Netherlands already 1774. Then we are coming to 1924 when the first mutual fund was founded, venture capital industry. So a lot has happened kind of already close to 100 years ago, but closer we come to kind of to today, and especially kind of after, say, financial, also so kind of a techno bubble, so kind of the fintech has had massive influence on the financial sector. So massive kind of a influence, as we will see, and it has become kind of one area where the innovations in terms of the number and magnitude and kind of everything has become really significant, and you could say massive. So as just one example, this is from an article from the US. So patents in financial patents in financial sector between 2000 and 2018 pretty clearly shows that most, in terms of the type of a patent, so they are in area of payments. So payments we have not been kind of discussing too much, not too much, essentially not at all during this course, but this is where the innovations have become really kind of a widespread. That's one kind of notion from this kind of statistics. Another one is that who are on which industry these innovators, these financial innovators come from. Mostly they come from IT. So this is something so new. As you might remember, when Mikko Aur visited us, he asked a question that they had asked in Actia, and the question was that where does this disruption most probably can come from? Is it from the capital needed? So that is what banks are very capital heavy. So they didn't see that kind of a big of a threat. It's very regulatory heavy. So that's kind of it's the barrier to join the banking industry or asset management industry is nowadays pretty high. But it could be payments, and payments obviously, that is what Mikko already was mentioning. So the payment systems have, and you see it kind of from your own behavior. We have Apple Pay and whatever kind of payment systems we have already kind of actively using in our everyday life. So this is kind of the big change, and it's not driven by banks. So in terms of banking, so banks are not, in terms of the number of new patents, they are not in the leading role. So this is a very recent kind of a significant development. And as just example, this was from Financial Times just in this January, a month ago. So a company called Checkout.com. So they raised 1 billion. It is a payment company, payment group, which made this financing round led to the market valuation of the company to 40 billion. And just kind of what is 40 billion, a lot of money. And just take a look at, for the reference, I had it here, say Deutsche Bank's market cap is 30 billion. Nordea's market cap is 43 billion, which is kind of something that people don't recognize, that Nordea is more valuable than Deutsche Bank. Monte dei Paschi di Siena, which I kind of referred every now and then. Why? Because it's the oldest bank in the world, facing kind of massive difficulties. Its market cap is less than 1 billion. So just a comparison, just as one example, how I'm not saying that this market is crazy, but this is kind of it's fascinating that kind of one payment company owner is valued as 40 billion, while big companies kind of having kind of long traditions and kind of in terms of social and economic impact. So the market cap can be even less. So it is just an indication that it's a very hot market, this payment industry. There was a question that what could be the reason the payment seemed to be quite. Yeah, the payment systems in the US, kind of in the Stone Age. Obviously, I can't answer you. First, I do not know. And there are many reasons. But at the same time, kind of very recently, if you look at kind of say just kind of I'm not a specialist in payment systems. That's just Apple Pay, for example. Kind of these technology companies in the US, they are pretty widely used already. So when I was in the US, and that is just kind of that come to my mind, is that as we are laughing, kind of Americans, that they are using checks. This is kind of that is a really Stone Age kind of as a innovation. So which we have not been in Europe, we have not been using for many years. So if you get the check, kind of you know that you have a headache, kind of you don't know what to do with that banknote. banks do not accept those, or you can't cash them, or you can the costs are tens of euros per one check, but those are still widely used in the US. I lived in Manhattan in New York 10 years ago. Okay, that was 10 years ago, it's different nowadays, but 10 years ago, I paid my rents, I paid my everything by using a check, which I thought it's unheard of. But that's one thing that makes it's fascinating. It works. And that is something that we have these different cultures which we can't measure at all. Something as just very totally different thing, that there's an equity investment culture in London. While in Germany, there is no equity investing culture. So individuals, institutions don't invest in equity markets, which has led to a situation where the whole equity investing ecosystem, investment banks, stock exchanges, in terms of equity trading, mutual funds, has not developed. While in the UK, in London, even after Brexit, so that is still the capital, equity capital market in Europe. Even though you might say that after Brexit, all this had moved to, say, Frankfurt or Paris or Amsterdam or whatever. It has not, because it's a cultural issue. And that is something that you can't measure. It's just a result of a historical development. The same with the paying with checks. Okay, in America, they have got used to that. They have the well-functioning system, and it works. Okay, it might be somewhat inefficient, but all the infrastructure has been on this check system. But thanks to these IT companies, technological companies, Apple, whatever new companies there, and some incubator new companies, startup companies. So this has been changing and will be changing also in the US. So there is not one reason. There's not one reason. And if you think of culture, you can't explain culture by just very shortly. How hard it is even to open a bank account in the US, everything takes multiple days. But let me add on that I can tell you it is some of you might have the experience to open a bank account in US. It's not that easy in Europe nowadays either, but in the US, when I opened, that was 10 years ago. It's close to impossible, but it's possible. And it's the ridiculous things that the documents that you are required to disclose. But even that is easier than close a bank account. I had a bank account at HSBC, and when I left back to Finland after a year, I went to HSBC branch and told that I would like to close my bank account. They simply told me that, no, that's impossible. You cannot close a bank account. And I said, okay, but I'm leaving the country. They said, no, that's another issue, but you can't close a bank account. But as a the result after 10 years is that I thought, okay, I will keep it there, and I will keep certain amount on the account so that there is no monthly fees, so I can avoid those. I thought, okay, it would be nice to have a bank account in the US. Whenever you go there, it's convenient to use it. But at some point I recognized, because I needed to pay every year, even though the interest stream, interest income was minimalistic, it was different from zero. So I needed to fulfill the tax statement every year. I thought this is this is for nothing, energy using for a totally irrelevant thing. So I flew to New York for whatever reason, and I visited bank branch and said, okay, I want to have the director here, and I want to close this bank account. It's we have the time. Okay, it's pretty interesting story. I could not imagine that this would happen in Finland. The director came there, said, okay, what's your problem? And she understood that, okay, we really do not want to have with my wife this bank account. When she took a closer look at that, kind of at some point, the bank account, which was on my name, I don't know, understand what had happened. That was on my wife's name. So there was no my name at all anymore on that kind of bank account. How could that happen? That you think that kind of in Europe, say Nordea, you have your own account. At some point, Nordea just moved that to your wife's or husband's. But that happened. Then it was my wife's headache. My wife said, okay, kind of she wants to kind of finish it, and we did it. And she did it, and that happened 5 years ago or so. We still today, every month, receive from HSBC a letter, kind of stating it's a very clean kind of a clear bank kind of monthly statement, stating that my wife received it. Then the saldo is $0. But the bank account seems to be there. And it's on my wife's name. There's a letter kind of once a year, and then annually at the end of the year becomes a kind of summary. And kind of think about kind of how this would be possible in say the Finnish banks. I can't think of kind of they are not sending letters to their kind of the current customers, not to kind of their previous customers. So it's really kind of there's room for improvement in terms of efficiency in American banking system, definitely. But despite of this, remember, kind of American banks are much more profitable than European banks, as we saw kind of in statistics. They are doing pretty good business nowadays. When in Europe, banks are facing kind of massive profitability challenges, especially in Southern Europe. So you can criticize them, but kind of something they do right. One would be that kind of the competition is pretty oligopolistic system, even in America, but it's kind of pretty. It's as once I mentioned that before the financial crisis, the common understanding is that there are too few players in banking sector. After the financial crisis, after the merger of big kind of companies, so the number of big banks in the US is smaller than it was before the financial crisis. So you might think that, okay, the competition is not as much as it should be. That could be one reason kind of it leads to kind of that customers typically kind of they accept these inefficient kind of practices, plus they pay too high fees. Okay, let's move on to fintech. Pretty kind of a good article from Economist already 2015. It was about the fintech revolution. And as you might see that it started from the crash of financial market 2007-8, which we know. Regulators have stuffed the banks with capital and turned compliance from back office job into a corner office one. So more compliance, regulation, kind of recommend everything away from the regulatory spotlight. Kind of the fintech companies have recognized that there's room for growth. Plus kind of new technology kind of development. So from payments to wealth management, from peer-to-peer lending to crowdfunding, the new generation of startups is taking aim at the heart of industry. So it's called, the Goldman Sachs estimates that it would be kind of worth of 4.7 billion. Silicon Valley kind of fintech has been one of the hot topics kind of almost for 10 years now. Many of these businesses are long past the experimental phase, so they are kind of up and running. They are no longer startups only, such as Lending Club, OnDeck, so have gone public. So, and Lending Club is a case company that we'll take a closer look at kind of just next. So huge growth, kind of there's a hype, kind of a lot of energy in this business, kind of compared with kind of say old school banking. Kind of it's totally different kind of a world, new energy nowadays. from this kind of a interesting article this was a speech you can find kind of in written form in internet, kind of how the online searches for fintech. It started from 2004. It's such a recent kind of a phenomenon. A new market, new investments have kind of been channeled to these markets, and just on Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, kind of highlighting in how many different kind of fields of financial sector these innovations now are taking place. So as innovation is now, it's not only kind of focusing on one product, say payments only, but it's kind of, it's very wide. It's kind of in crowdfunding, lending marketplaces. So this has to do with the lending club. So peer-to-peer lending, mobile banks, credit scoring using technology, kind of payments, mobile wallets, peer-to-peer transfers, digital currencies, okay, cryptocurrencies, will talk on Thursday, wholesale market, investment banking, investment management services, high frequency trading, kind of it's technology, nothing else. E-trading, robo-advisory, kind of so much has been going on in so many different kind of sectors of financial services that has never happened kind of before. And just as an example, kind of how wide is the picture kind of that shows these are more or less kind of startups. Kind of just think that kind of for hundreds of years, the banking sector was dominated by big banks, insurance companies. Now what has happened in just very kind of short time period, robo-advisors, regtechs, digital banks, payments, blockchain, insurance, alternative finance, kind of tens and tens new companies kind of have been kind of founded, and they segment typically when they start some very kind of small segment in banking, but on that they're very good, and at some point they might aim to kind of to broaden their offering. And this has been forecasted to lead to, if not death, but kind of at least major kind of shrinking of the old school, the banking. A lot of kind of jobs would be kind of disappearing in the old banking sector, and the jobs will be kind of be opened. The job opportunities kind of in like in Yuichia Wu. He says that he would immediately kind of hire a couple of new guys if they are kind of good in the cryptocurrency business, crypto lending kind of facility that he will explain on Thursday. So there's new companies that kind of grow. This market didn't exist before, but now the market is booming. And companies need new recruitments. Kind of the challenge there is that kind of for the people, for the guys who have experience from this previous banking world, it might be that they have no capabilities to in this in current environment. So you guys, you are young. So kind of when you graduate, kind of one day, kind of in the near future, so you are not contaminated with this previous kind of experience, but kind of you are open to new kind of businesses, new kind of ways to operate. So in that sense, in financial sector, kind of there will be new jobs, but they are very different from what kind of say what your parents did kind of when they went banking. And then the case, peer-to-peer lending, it goes to the core. It goes to the core of banking. This is from Goldman Sachs' report. This is from 2015, The Future of Finance, the rise of the new shadow bank. And of this report, I take intentionally one segment, which is unsecured personal lending. So it has to do with lending. That was what banks used to be doing only. That was lending. Say they take deposits and they provide kind of loans. So in terms of the significance, this was supposed to kind of, according to Goldman Sachs forecast Lending Club prosper. So as a result of lower capital requirements and utilizing the new technology, so they would take over kind of a pretty big proportion, surprisingly big proportion of the existing banks. So this was supposed to be kind of the biggest kind of the segment in terms of the fintech peer-to-peer lending kind of market. As one company, Lending Club, this was mentioned in the Economist article and was also mentioned here in this Goldman Sachs report. This was the leading company, and still is kind of one of the first ones, kind of had an IPO, became publicly traded company. And what it is that you can apply for a loan, not from the bank, but using kind of your mobile phone. You apply kind of from Lending Club. Lending Club, just think of what it does. It acts between the borrowers and investors. So Lending Club is not the bank. They say, okay, we don't need this kind of banking balance. Investors have a headache. How should we kind of allocate our capital so that kind of we get some return? Instead of putting our money on a bank account yielding nothing, how about kind of forming a platform? And that's something that Lending Club did. It's a platform. It's on the internet that kind of where investors can meet these borrowers. We have some people who would like to borrow money, but instead of going to the bank and all the kind of capital, whatever kind of collateral requirements, how about kind of a ask for a loan from investors? So Lending Club is a platform. So there is no risk that if kind of for the society, that if the one who borrows money cannot pay the loan back, who loses? It's the investor. Investor takes the credit risk. One in the bank, if kind of the bank faces a major kind of a credit loss, it might risk the operations of the bank, and the bank needs to be bailed out by the government. And that's to prevent that happening. The government requires the kind of capital requirements and kind of which are massive. From Lending Club, capital requirements can be very light. So the difference between these peer-to-peer lending and traditional lending is that for personal loan made by a bank, the loan is funded with deposits. It's held on bank's balance sheet, and they maintain a credit risk. While the peer-to-peer lender, they just connect investors, willingness to take credit risk to borrowers, kind of leaving the intermediary, which is this platform, with no retained credit risk. So you might allow this business to be run with clearly less stringent capital requirements, which kind of makes sense. They utilize technology. They don't need kind of Lending Club doesn't need big branches, kind of big offices, big kind of fixed cost buildings. And there was an article in Economist which compared Lending Club with traditional banks. So there's obviously no cost from branches, while big banks kind of big cost comes from their buildings. Credit scoring, this Lending Club said, okay, we use technology, we can do it more efficiently. It's mostly marketing. So to make themselves visible so that both investors and borrowers kind of know that, okay, we should go to Lending Club to do business. So the marketing is the biggest source of the cost. But clearly, you could see that this is Economist article kind of picture to copy from there. Kind of a Lending Club can run the business much more clearly, kind of efficiently than old school banks. Plus, which is very fascinating, additional thing is that there was a Swedish kind of a study a couple of years ago which analyzed that how do customers kind of appreciate these new offerings, they show that the higher the distrust in existing banking system, and especially after the financial crisis, banks were not seen on a too much kind of positive kind of light. So some customers did not trust the old school banks anymore, but they liked more these newcomers, these techno companies, which could be that you guys you have got used kind of to all your businesses, all your kind of everyday transactions with the mobile phones. So kind of for you, it's kind of to have a cool offering on an online, on a mobile. So that could be kind of the bigger thing that kind of, and for your parents who kind of thought that, okay, it's important the bank has kind of a big kind of headquarters and kind of a lot of kind of employees and kind of a lot of personal kind of service. You guys might think, okay, I'm not interested in personal service. I do everything online anyway. I prefer these new customers. How do you make sure the borrowers will pay back? That is something that you do not. Very good question, Deborah. How do you make sure that the borrowers will pay back? Customers do take a credit risk. And that is something that kind of I will answer that very quickly, kind of after this. So you might say that peer-to-peer lending platforms enjoy many advantages: lower capital requirements, lower operating costs, plus it could be that they are more kind of trendy, so customers might just prefer them. 2015, Goldman Sachs forecasted that this lending club approach, that this would be kind of a clear kind of a growth market. And there's no way that kind of can prevent these new companies, these platforms, taking market share from existing banks. So it was obvious, it was seen obvious that this market will grow. Growth market in online alternative market is also happening in the UK, in the US. But then what happened? What happened was that Lending Club as a company, this was in 2018, there was a governance scandal. Okay, it was company specific, combined with mounting competition. So new companies coming into this market as well, plus Deborah, rising defaults on the riskiest classes of loans. So what happened was that it turned out that customers, first of all, Lending Club, they have a service that they classify. They have in a way they have a rating service that for different clients, so they rate them in terms of it's a credit rating system, which they classified, was it 6 or 5 different classes, and this information is public. So clients are being told that this is the lowest risk tranche of clients. Clients typically invest in a portfolio. So clients have an option to lend to one customer only, but that is not advised, as we know that kind of credit risk is something that you should hold kind of as an investor, diversified portfolios. So kind of this what Lending Club did offer and still does is a portfolio of different loans. Okay, one category is the lowest credit risk portfolio. The second, the higher risk, and the highest risk. The highest risk portfolio obviously had the highest kind of the interest that the clients were accepted to pay, and there was high demand for this highest risk category from investors. Turned out, this was ex ante. Exposed, turned out that many of these clients, or too many, did not pay. So the credit risk realized. It was not that customers lost money, but instead of receiving it was more than 10% was kind of the interest that customers were kind of promising to pay. Afterwards, investors only received something like, say, 1%. So clearly less than what they expected. Actually, so the riskiest loan portfolio customers received lowest yield. This was a disappointment. you could say market economy worked kind of just in a way. Lending Club was able to classify the riskiest clients, but what went wrong, but the customers kind of got disappointed. So there was an expectation gap that they didn't recognize that well, that it can happen that customers don't pay. So credit risk was there, and that credit risk was kind of investors faced that. So that kind of question. Sorry, no, but battery is running low. So there was a credit risk that kind of realized in too many cases. So there is a risk, and that led to kind of lending clubs struggling if it's business. Instead of growing, it kind of the growth kind of stalled, and new kind of low originations kind of started going down, and the company faces kind of a class action lawsuits related to governance. Start make losses. The lending club and other competitors kind of they were in a way kind of everybody liked them kind of when they came to the market, but then investors get disappointed, and the stock prices kind of fell pretty heavily. The similar kind of experience from the Sweden in peer-to-peer lending market in China. It was a fraud, kind of a massive fraud. Finland, we have Fellow Finance, which is now going to, that was founded by, jointly founded by Taaleri. Now they will join this, the Fellow Finance will join with Evli's kind of a banking operations, and will start operating kind of in, I don't know, this spring anyway. So kind of their growth has been disappointment. A lot of expectations, but kind of many disappointments kind of from investor side. And now coming to the key, this is the lending club as a lending club and peer-to-peer lending as a example of a fintech, which kind of totally makes sense, but for some reason it has been a disappointment. And now in the same Goldman Sachs 2015 report already, which kind of they forecasted the lending club clearly will take market share. They already recognize that there most probably will be increased regulatory scrutiny as these non-banks become larger. So when the market was very new and players were very small, so nobody too much paid attention. But as Goldman Sachs says that if it looks and smells like a bank, it can be regulated like one. So there was a threat of regulation. And expansion into other asset classes, it's kind of another challenge is that kind of you might kind of be successful in a very small business segment, but to broaden your offering, that could be kind of a challenge. Plus, it's not that these big existing banks kind of just follow that newcomers kind of will take their market share. They will, of course, they recognize that this is happening. They might reduce pricing to compete. They might acquire. Goldman Sachs has been, for example, buying these newcomers, and they most probably you can expect that they will tell the regulator kind of that we should have a level level playing field. So the same if you operate in banking kind of a type of a business, so the regulation should be kind of a somewhat fair. So it can't be that we as a bank we face all these kind of tough regulations, while these newcomers there is no regulatory scrutiny at all. And that has been kind of the trend in while these techno companies have been developing new offerings like Apple and Google. So in say credit card business, banking kind of payment systems. So the bank representatives have been requiring that kind of these companies must be regulated like traditional banks. The deeper these techno companies come to these financial services. And so Wall Street is the representatives of kind of existing companies. They are lobbying a lot, and just think very interesting kind of relative to or related to the lending club was that it was like everybody's kind of favorite, then faced some difficulties. What has happened since then? This is from last year's March. So they acquired a bank. So as this article referred, kind of it was in the wake of financial crisis, fintechs threatened to eat the lunch of stodgy, paralyzed banking titans, so the big old school banks. Algorithms would give them an edge, and their lack of branches would take them agile. So this is something that we were discussing. Lending Club was one of the first ones, but it looks that tough regulation and steep capital requirements are evidently prices worth paying for the cheap funding from deposits. So the Lending Club decided, okay, it's better for us to acquire a bank and seek to finance our operations as deposits and accept that, okay, we become closer and closer like kind of the existing big banks so being an online only has some advantages, but it's not that easy. Competition and customers might still favor kind of bank deposits. So that is an example that it's not that easy. Definitely, development will continue. We will have new innovations all the time, but just as an example that it's not that easy to compete with existing banks, as this Lending Club as an example kind of shows. Any questions concerning kind of financial innovations? This is just like a warm-up kind of section for Thursday. When Eugene will kind of discuss about kind of cryptocurrencies. That is talk about innovation, as I said, that is totally new. Bitcoin was founded in, was it 2009? So how much has happened ever since? Kind of it's a fascinating field. Any questions, comments? Everything good? What happens to loans if essentially that is, it's only a platform. So you have borrowed, I don't know, of course it's not good, but kind of you have not borrowed from the platform. You have borrowed from this investor. An investor has lent to the customer. So I guess in basically it is the same as in a mutual fund. If a mutual fund company goes bankrupt, it's kind of rarely ever happens, but it might happen. Barings Bank in Singapore went bankrupt. So we still see in the markets Barings mutual funds. So they are owned not by the mutual fund investment company, mutual fund company, but the customers. So it could happen that, and most probably will happen, that the business will be sold to somebody kind of that continues these operations. And the same I would expect that happens for the peer-to-peer platform. If Lending Club went bankrupt, so somebody would take over that business, and the existing kind of business contracts kind of will continue. Then something else regarding the taper on cover page and table of contents counted. No, that can be on top of the 10 pages. Then why does the peer-to-peer platform have any capital requirements if it carries no credit risk? This is something that I have never thought of, but now as you ask it, but kind of as a disclosure kind of so this is not knowledge, this is just kind of speculation, but it must be that kind of the regulator and society, it's not good for the market that some players will go bankrupt every now and then. So to increase the trust in the financial segment, so some capital requirements is being needed. So that is at least the case for the mutual fund company. So some capital is being kind of, there are capital requirements also for mutual fund companies as they are for these peer-to-peer kind of companies, so that there is some risk element, some capital that owner must put in this business to avoid kind of maximum risk taking. So do they have capital? They are not, but they have some capital requirements, but they are clearly lighter. Totally kind of different playing field than banks. But there are some capital requirements. On peer-to-peer lending companies, I do not know how they're defined. In asset management businesses, mutual fund companies, the minimum is 125,000 euros plus certain proportion of assets under management. It's totally different kind of a level than what banks are being required. So to keep the investors calm, kind of not make them nervous, kind of it's kind of overall kind of, I guess everybody benefits from seeing that kind of the players who are there you can trust, and kind of so any scandals, any bankruptcy, any defaults, that they always hit for the trust in the market. So that is not good for the market. Market's kind of image. But I need to take a look at kind of the capital. Say fellow finance, for example, do they have specific capital requirements that could be kind of good? I will not ask that in the exam, but kind of that would be pretty good, kind of a cool question. I need to find that out first myself. Okay, good. Is that all for today? Please prepare. Please take a look at kind of the articles that kind of I sent you, or kind of Eugen sent us for Thursday. On Thursday, please kind of join and be active. Kind of see you on Thursday then. Cheers.